Thank you, Jill, and welcome everyone. I'm Sophie Lambin. I'm the founder and CEO of Kite Insights, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar on embedding sustainability mindset across your organization. If you move to the next slide, I would like to introduce my colleagues with whom we'll be running through this webinar today. So Grace Chua, who is the head of writing and storytelling at Kites, and Julian Benjamin, head of learning content. To our next slide, a few words of introduction briefly on Kite, who we are, and inspired us to set up the climate school a few years ago. We've been an impact-led business for the last 10 years, really working with companies on sustainability issues, whether social or environmental or both. And really our work revolves around, on one hand, helping companies make sense of those inherently complex issues, and particularly when it comes to the private sector taking a stance and taking action on those issues is inherently complex. And we do so in providing research and issue brief and issue mapping, helping companies to really identify the issue footprint and the kind of intervention they can make around those issues. We also work on companies on taking a stance on those issues, which in our view is really a prerequisite of how business can intervene in that space, and that through event curation, through leadership and various types of engagement strategy. And last but not least, we build capabilities to really equip employees and their leaders with the understanding of what it takes to embed this consideration in their job, in their company, and in their industry. And that's really where the climate school comes into play. All that around this overall framing about focusing on the issues that matter. And those are usually longer term issues around which business increasingly is engaging. You see below the kind of clients we've been working with over the past 10 years. And this pool of clients is growing as I think increasingly a business is fully embracing the importance to engage meaningfully around those issues. Next slide captures in a nutshell really what we're trying to do with the climate school, the slide before, thank you, which is really trying to capture people where the potential for impact and action is the greatest, i.e. at work. And when you think about it, I'm sure you can all relate to that. When you look at climate and sustainability issues from the sideline, it feels this task is too big for me to handle, or this problem is too complex for me to really consider what it is that I can do. When you do it from the confine of your own home, in your private life, yes, we all contribute a bit and it's very important, but often these tasks feel too small and not commensurate to the challenge we face. And yet, if you capture people at work, not necessarily in installing a solar panel, but really where in the context of companies that have made a net zero commitment, that have resources, that have targets, that have a really very strong burning platform to engage around those issues, we feel that capturing people in that context is where the potential for impact is the greatest, and where individual action have the potential to add to the sum of its parts. So that captures in a few images, I think, where the space within which we try to play. Now, next slide, we recognize that capturing people's desire to act while undeniably high, and my colleagues will give you a few more compelling data points around that, but really capturing people's desire to act in the context of work is not easy. There are lots of demands placed on people's time, and really finding the right kind of engagement mechanism for people to connect with the content and the so what of that content for their job, as well as finding the motivation to act, but doing so in a way that feels safe and regenerative is really what we're trying to do with our approach to the climate school. So with this setup, I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague, Grace Chua, Head of Storytelling and Writing at Kite Insights, to start us off on this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sophie. Before we go into the first lesson from years of delivering climate training, let's get into a little bit of a poll. We've heard from Sophie that yes, employees are very keen to get involved in climate and sustainability initiatives in the context of their work. We're going to share a few data points in a moment, but first we'd like to ask you, has your organization run climate training for employees? No, you're planning to, or perhaps you've already done one. Maybe that's why you're here today, to learn more about how to do it. And as the responses come in, we can go on to the next slide. As promised, some data points. Last year, we published a survey that we'd done of over 7,000 employees in private sector companies, and this is across industries, sectors, and geographies. And what we found, next slide, this is people who, every level from the C-suite to the shop floor, across genders and generations, what we discovered was that the desire to act on climate at work is mainstream. So that is 80%, over 80% of employees. And this cuts across all demographics, all seniorities. So there's a huge amount of desire to act on climate change in the context of work. You may have heard that, oh, it's Gen Z, it's your younger employees who are driving this desire, who have the motivation to act. In fact, we discovered that this is true at all levels of seniority. Next slide. And we discovered also that over 70% of employees say it's essential to their motivation and well-being that they can take action on climate change at work. See, Anna, do we have poll results coming yet? Meanwhile, we'll come back to that in a moment. There is a gap. There's a motivation and empowerment gap, let's say. We discovered also that obviously at senior levels, people feel like they have more agency to take action on climate. At junior levels, there's a bit of a discrepancy. But if we go on to the next slide, this creates risks. If people don't feel like they have the knowledge, the agency to act, they will leave. In our survey, we found that 15% of employees have actually considered changing jobs to work more closely on climate change and sustainability issues. This is how important that it is to them. This is true of millennials and Gen Z as well, in particular. Now, there is an opportunity. We see that in our poll that about half of the organizations here have not yet run climate training for your employees. Most employees don't feel sufficiently informed about climate change, and they don't feel ready to act. But, next slide, they are willing to take on climate training related to climate action in the context of their work. This is a key opportunity to help your employees understand your company's climate commitments, if there's climate training that is obviously aligned with those commitments. And it's an opportunity, in fact, to show your people that, in fact, they are valued, you're investing in them by running climate training for them. And here's an opportunity for us to build something better together. Let's go on to the next slide. So the details in full of the survey, what we'll do is share this in the follow-up to this session. Jill, next slide, thank you. And as we go along, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and there will be time for Q&A later on. Jill, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Grace. Okay, so our second lesson is really around the importance of creating a shared understanding. I think so often if we look at this image and we think of this image as an organization, and we think of those white dots as perhaps deep areas of expertise sitting in your sustainability department, perhaps in your procurement department. What I guess we're hoping for through when we're looking at kind of specially broad, like at scale climate training, where we're trying to ensure that the entire organization has a shared understanding of risks and opportunities. I guess what we're hoping for is kind of to go from something like this to something like this, where we're not just sitting with small contained areas of knowledge, but we're seeing more of a spread across the organization. But I think important to note, we're not trying to turn everyone into experts. We're just trying to kind of raise the water level of understanding within the organization so that people are seeing climate risk and opportunity in the same way. So we need everyone on board. And I love this quote that it's better to have 500 employees thinking about how to do things better than just 2 or 3 in the sustainability team. And I think everyone here is on board with that sentiment. So we're in agreement that we need to build this shared understanding across the organization. And we're in agreement that in a way, the shared understanding is what will lubricate our ability within our organization to drive change at the speed and scale that is necessary. Without this shared understanding, you're going to be in a situation where you have people sitting in a boardroom, some people who are, let's call them kind of in the green bubble. They understand the risks that are coming. They also understand the opportunities. And then you've got people who might have a little bit less understanding of the topic, just not seeing those opportunities in the same way, or not taking those risks as seriously. And that then just kind of slows down the whole mechanism of how the organization can move towards those sustainability goals. So yes, we need this company-wide training to bring everyone up to that same water level of understanding. But of course, it has its limitations. So I think often, especially for those of us who are sitting in learning and development and training, our theory of change looks a little bit like this. We've got a problem. Let's create some training. Let's educate people. Let's get the information into people's heads. And this is going to lead to the behavior change that we want to see. It's going to lead to people having deeper levels of confidence to be able to take action, and it's going to lead to the development of new skills and competencies. And I think those of us who've been in the space for some time also know that kind of this really isn't the case. I will be the first person to admit that kind of digital training has its limitations in terms of being able to move you towards these goals. It's definitely a start, but it's not going to take you the whole way. And it needs to be coupled with other thoughtful interventions to really help people build that confidence that they need to drive action. So our third lesson today is really all about when we're thinking about scalable digital training, it's really important to speak directly to your employees. And here is this tension between kind of off-the-shelf offerings versus bespoke offerings. Obviously, off the shelf, it's much quicker to deploy. Sometimes it can be a lot cheaper. Doing the whole customized build out can take a really long time and be resource heavy. But there is a middle ground, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a bit. But really, you want your staff member to be sitting there feeling like they are being spoken to as an individual, that the content is really tailored to either kind of what they're going through in their role or what the company more broadly is going through. So there's huge opportunity here to bring to life the whole kind of macro scene of what is going on in climate and sustainability through really tangible company-specific examples. So I'm going to just show you how we've done that in one of our training products. So Kite has a range of different digital products. Some have been made by other providers that we sell, and some have been built in-house. this is an example of our in-house training. We've got kind of two versions. We've got Kite Compact, which is 1.5 hours of training split up into much shorter 10-minute long lessons. And this compact 90-minute training is really good for this kind of broad, wide company training, because people are so stretched for time. If you're kind of trying to get something into your mandatory training kind of schedule, 1.5 hours is probably the max that you're looking at there. And then we've got an extended version of that, which is 6 hours of training split up into 4 modules. But what kind of really marries these two is the ability to integrate bespoke company-specific content anywhere in the course. Both of these can also be used off the shelf, but to me, the magic really comes in that bespoking. So at a high level, the curriculum starts off by speaking about the case for business action. We look into kind of what are the risks, what are the opportunities of the transition. Lesson 2, we look into kind of climate 101. We look at what impacts we're already seeing in the world. Lesson 3 looks at kind of the flip side of climate in terms of same coin, different side, the biodiversity crisis, the nature crisis, and how this is affecting companies. In lesson 4, we look at kind of the high level policy space. We unpack Paris Agreement and all the raft of policies that are flowing from that. And then we also look at kind of how different companies are responding. And that takes us into lesson 5, where we really go deep into corporate sustainability. And lesson 6, we look at what you can do in different job functions. So in terms of kind of how might we bring this to life? How do we bring in those bespoke examples? And here is just a bit of an idea of the opportunities that exist, whether it's kind of this curriculum that you're using, whether it's a different curriculum, there are all these opportunities where you can weave in your company-specific examples. So in lesson 1, I would want us to speak about your company-specific risks and opportunities. In lesson 2, when we're looking at climate change, I want to show staff how the company has already been impacted by either extreme weather or perhaps regulation. In lesson 3, when we're looking at biodiversity loss, if your company has a supply chain, we want to really tease out the ways in which your company is reliant upon nature. In lesson 4, we want to look at your company sustainability goals and the progress that you've made to date. In lesson 5, let's share some examples of what competitors are doing. And in lesson 6, let's really develop out company-specific actions for each job function. So this just gives a bit of a flavor of how you can really bring this climate content to life by these bespoke examples. I'm going to now switch out of here and do a bit of a demo. So just excuse me while I share a different screen. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just take you through a few samples from different lessons in the course to show you how we do this integration. So the course is made up of images and text and visuals. So here we're looking at climate impacts, short little flip cards to just help people understand what's already happening. And then right next to that, we go into company-specific impact. So here we've got a fictional company that is working in the food and beverage space, and we're looking at kind of how a drought has affected their suppliers' farms. It's led to a 12% decrease in the volume of herbs that they were able to procure. We look at flooding that happened and cut off one of their distribution centers, which meant that they weren't able to get heavy goods vehicles in and out. And that had a financial impact on their Q1 2022 figures. And then we look at some infrastructure damage that happened in another geography of theirs. So this marrying of the kind of the macro and the very particular creates for quite powerful learning. I'm just going to go a bit further down here, jump to another lesson where we're looking at what climate action looks like for a specific company. So here we're getting people to think about their organization, and think about kind of where most of the emissions come from. So really trying to kind of get people to reflect as they move through the course. Then we're introducing students to scope 1, 2, and 3, which can often be quite an abstract thing to grasp. But what you can see we can do, so this is kind of, we're still in the general side of things. And then as we move through the course, we're able to make it a bit more particular. So we bring in here figures, same graph as before, but figures now based on the company's emissions, so that staff can really see that, oh gosh, 92% of our emissions are sitting in scope 3. Suddenly that brings scope 3 to life in a way that didn't quite happen earlier when you just saw that kind of generic image, and it wasn't linking to the company. So it really is this dance between the kind of the content and the specificity related to the company. So here we can also go into the company's specific targets. We would have a video of senior leader here speaking about kind of why this is important to the company and progress to date. Also always looking for ways to kind of bring facts and figures to life. So here we're looking at a company's emissions. We're comparing it to emissions annually sequestered by a forest the size of Netherlands. And then looking at kind of how that diminishes, what those targets look like over time. So really trying to make very, very clear, crisp pieces of communication. And then finally, in another lesson, looking at role-specific actions. So we would work with the company here to really unpack what the main functions are within the company, and then what are the actions that people sitting in that function can take. Again, some of the stuff is quite general, but a lot of it will be particular to your context and your different roles. And then finally, a piece that I really like is also like taking a bit of time to really just champion the amazing individuals and work that is happening within the organization. So here we've just got some very basic flip cards where we look at sustainability champions and unpack a little bit of the work that they're doing. And this can be done through something as simple as kind of images and text. In other projects, we've done videos with these champions as well. And I think this is such a powerful way to really show other staff kind of the art of the possible by saying, these are your peers. This is the amazing work that they've done. Really, really inspiring kind of pieces of communication. I'm going to stop sharing now and just jump back to the other slideshow. Okay. So our fourth lesson for the day is that online learning is really only one part of the solution. We really want to get people to spend time together and enable social learning, because that's where all the magic really happens. So I love this graphic of the pyramid of learning, which shows average retention rates based on the mode of learning. So unfortunately, in the mode that we're currently in, you're only going to remember about 5% of what I'm saying. Not great. We're going to move to a discussion soon. So hopefully retention will increase a little bit there. So I think often with online learning, digital learning, we're sitting up in this passive space, right? So your maximum you're getting is maybe around 20% retention. And as soon as you begin to combine that with more social learning, we're sitting down here in these participatory teaching methods where the retention rate is a lot higher. So how do we weave in discussion groups? How do we make sure that people are practicing by doing? And kind of the highest goal, how do we get people to teach others so that they build that confidence to be able to speak about, communicate, and really kind of drive action on these topics. So another way of looking at this pyramid of learning is the forgetting curve. So this was developed by a guy called Herman Ebbinghaus in 1885. It is a very incomplete study because it has a sample size of 1, but it stood the test of time. It is kind of widely cited. And what he did is he memorized a whole lot of content and then measured his recall. And what he found that kind of after 20 minutes, he had already forgotten about 60% of what he had tried to remember. And after 9 hours, he was sitting at below 40%. So really just another way of showing that previous slide. So what are some of the social learning opportunities that we can integrate and kind of flavor our digital training with? And it's really about kind of how we couple the digital space with in-person moments. So of course we can have design thinking or brainstorming sessions where we are really giving staff the time, the space, and the permission to problem solve on some of the topics that they might have learned about. You can really get staff to test out that kind of presentation, teaching others by staff presenting strategies to their team. If the content, which a lot of climate content can be really quite troubling for people who are people aren't hearing about this for the first time, but I think often with these kinds of trainings, people are connecting the dots between the different areas for the first time. And that can be, if you're looking at it with your eyes wide open, it can be quite an emotionally jarring experience. So how do we kind of create containers and space for people to debrief, to process some of that emotional stuff that might be coming up, whether it's climate anxiety, whether it's kind of fear about their kids' futures. And then lastly, thinking about what online networks you have in your company already. Most companies have internal messaging systems. So how can you kind of create groups on those systems? If you're taking a cohort of staff through a training experience, how can you then create a group for them to continue that discussion? And then really the kind of, for me, the gold standard of this all is moving from a place where we are saying, right, we've got this training program, 10,000 employees, everyone, we want to get everyone trained up in this. It launches in January. Everyone needs to have done it by July. Quite a kind of one and done approach, one size fits all, to moving to more cohort-based learning. And this becomes really important when you're looking at function-specific training as well. Think about how you can break staff up into smaller groups and run synchronous training programs. So let's say everyone is starting the course on 15th of January and you're ending 6 weeks later. And during that time, you're doing some digital training, and that is infused with online workshops with a smaller group. Perhaps you're in a group of 6 people and the cohort size is maybe 200, 300 people, but you're coming together in these smaller groups to really double down on group cohesion and that peer-to-peer learning piece. And then if you have the time and energy to really think about how you then nurture the alumni groups that come out of these synchronous cohort-based programs. Just wanted to also share 1 or 2 slides on some workshops that we really like to work with in order to just bring people together and let people hear each other's voices and opinions. This is an image here of a climate fresque workshop that we facilitate. And really, a lot of you might know the fresque modality, but it's based on the IPCC report, and it allows people to kind of sense make causes and impacts of climate change. And it's a really nice way to kind of bring everyone on board and create that shared level of understanding that I spoke about earlier in the session. Okay, final lesson before we switch on over to Q&A. And the 5th lesson is that not all functions are created equal. So we need to create function-specific trainings for those key parts of the business that are strategically important. So here's a list of functions that lots of companies will have. And here is a list of what we are hearing from our clients in terms of what those strategic functions are that really need that deeper level of upskilling. So we're hearing a lot, obviously, around finance. We know that there's a lot of regulation in place and more coming down the line. So this need to really get the finance teams up to speed with what they need to know about in terms of compliance and reporting. Obviously, big focus on supply chain and procurement. And we're hearing a lot of interest around training for client-facing staff. So companies will come to us and they say, we've set our net zero targets. We've got really ambitious goals that we're trying to achieve, but we've got this issue with our client-facing staff just not having the confidence to go out and have the conversations and sell the more sustainable products to staff. So without that confidence in those client-facing individuals, the company isn't going to be able to meet those goals because they aren't going to be able to move towards that more sustainable product or business model that they know they need to reach those net zero targets. And then, of course, kind of the marketing and comms piece is really around kind of a risk of greenwashing. Often companies have their targets, marketing departments can get super excited to kind of share. And obviously, if you are sharing in the wrong way, or you are perhaps putting too much focus on some elements, there is that risk of greenwashing. So those are a few of the business functions that we're hearing need around. And I'm just going to quickly show you an example of a blended learning journey that we created for a large global bank to take some of those client-facing staff through. So again, kind of blended with that kind of bit of online, but predominantly actually this is kind of in person. Some of these we did in person kind of at a venue, and others we did virtually. But starting off with a launch event with some expert speakers to get people excited about the topic. Then we did some light preparatory e-learning, almost like a pre-read to a one-day workshop. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about what that workshop looked like in a bit. But after that workshop, we then had about a month's break. And during that break, staff went out and tested what they had learned in the workshop in their client conversations. And then we came back together to really reflect, think about kind of what worked, what didn't work, and co-create that best practice. So the workshop started with a climate fresque. Then we did some case study work, company presentations on their strategy, a bit of a overview of risk and regulations. And really the heart of this workshop was around practicing client scenarios. So we broke into groups of 3. One person was that client-facing individual, another one was the client, and the third person was the observer. And through having these role-played conversations, it really allowed people to kind of get a bit more comfortable with the content. A bit of time to plan their next meeting, and then out into the world. So that's a bit of a flavor of what that kind of client-facing work could look like. And with that, we are into Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing screen so we can all see each other. Please feel free to turn your cameras on for Q&A, but we've got about 20 minutes for questions. So please fire away. And I'm sure some stuff has come into the chat. So if one of the team also want to feed through questions from the chat, as and when we've got a gap for that. Thank you, everyone.
Just to hop in here as well, we're taking questions in the chat, or please feel free to use the raised hand reaction in Zoom if you'd like. In the meantime, actually, for Jill, one challenge, right? We see that the audience is from a number of different sectors, industries, geographies, all over the world, in fact. One thing that might be coming to mind is there's great variation in where different regions and employees are starting from. How can we address this challenge?
So the question is really about the global spread, Grace, when we have large multinationals coming with people sitting all over the world.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting one. The easiest answer is obviously around just ensuring that we're translating into as many languages as possible. The more nuanced answer is around, it comes back to my point around bespoking, and is really around, different geographies are at different places on their kind of sustainability maturity. If you were to go to, let's say, South Africa or Indonesia, or, you can't really compare that with where we are in the UK. So I think some adaptation of those materials for local markets is really important. And there, I think it becomes about really thinking about that kind of that rollout strategy. Often in our minds, when we hear of a company of, let's say, 45,000 people, you think, excellent, we'll be able to have such incredible impact once we've trained them all up. But a lot of the time, training isn't centralized, it's all decentralized. So it's really about how do you kind of arm the team sitting in those decentralized geographies with the base content they need to then be able to adapt it to their markets.
We have questions in the chat, by the way, and 3 of them. I can read them to you, Jill, if you like, or do you want to read them and answer them yourself?
Cool. Yeah, I'll answer them myself. Okay, so I'm going to start from the bottom up. Curious to know whether you could do this kind of L&D work for sustainability as an overarching topic, not just climate. So yes, we do sustainability and not just climate. Some of the slides might be more climate focused, but really our kind of learning content covers the whole raft of sustainability, looking at both kind of social piece, governance piece as well. So yeah, Shannon would love to chat more. Thanks, Sophie. Danny said, how often do you review and refresh data in your trainings? Great question. And as often as possible is my unofficial answer, but it really also depends on the training. So, for example, if we're rolling out a finance training to a company, you probably want to be looking at a quarterly or a biannually, every 6 months update of that. For other trainings, you might be able to get away with a kind of a year cadence. But in terms of us as Kite updating our base training, that happens continuously. But yeah, it is, with some of these areas, they're so fast moving that it really is, something that needs to be constantly updated. And then we've got a bit more detail on Tom's question around work with the Donut Lab. And unfortunately, I can't answer that one because I don't really work that deeply in the workshop side of things. But I know that we have been looking at the how we can build deeper connections with the work that the amazing work that the Donut Lab is doing. Have any other questions come in?
While people perhaps collect their thoughts, I do have a question, Jill, that I'm curious about. We're obviously well aware that climate change is an urgent crisis that needs to be addressed. So in your experience, at what kind of pace do we expect employee upskilling to actually translate into climate action by companies?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that to answer that, the pace is really dependent on the company and how much time and space they're going to give employees to, firstly, to upskill, and then secondly, to kind of work on climate related projects. So I think to Sophie's slide right at the beginning, everyone is super stretched for time. So it's really about kind of the company saying, this is a priority for us, and this is not a side of desk thing. We're bringing you into this training for this long, and then in order to kind of embed that training, what is the kind of the project or the task that they're going to set for people who have been trained up to really kind of embed that learning. So I think a lot of it depends on just how seriously the company is taking it, and how much time they will allow staff to work on it.
It really speaks to all of the rest of the governance factors, right?
Yep.
Is it incentivized? Is it rewarded? Is there, do employees then have a mandate once they receive sustainability training? Do they have a mandate to then, go off in their groups and take action?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that mandate piece is so important in terms of how is this being integrated into organizational KPIs, and how is that then filtering down to those individual KPIs or OKRs or whatever system your company is using? Is that showing up when an employee is sitting down to have a performance review? Is there some kind of sustainability related KPI that they should be working towards? And if there isn't, then yeah, the training isn't going to be as effective. What's the saying? What matters gets measured, or I always forget it, but that one.
What gets measured gets managed.
Thank you.
In the most slightly dismal variation of it.
Yeah.
Which actually brings us, to the next question, which is how can we measure the impact, right, of employee upskilling on climate?
Yeah, great question. And again, kind of there's the easy entry level way, and then there is the kind of the more in-depth way. So I would say kind of at a minimum, you want to do pre and post course surveys. So short, 3 to 5 minutes, just on questions, really trying to understand, first of all, a bit on kind of knowledge, right? But also just around people's kind of mindsets, and around also kind of how confident they feel to do really kind of small things like raise their opinion in a meeting or speak to a colleague about a sustainability related topic. So kind of measure that before the training, and then of course after the training. Will give us a really nice baseline, but that doesn't really give us a true recording of impact, because we need to kind of have a bit of a time lag. So if that survey can be repeated 3 months out, that gives us a much clearer picture of that change. I think so that's a measurement tool linked to the training itself. I mean, Kite has another kind of measurement tool called the CARA, which is Climate Action Readiness Assessment, which is a really nice kind of annual benchmarking tool. Takes about 15 minutes and allows us to measure across head, heart, and hands. So of course, head being the kind of the knowledge, heart being the motivation, and hands being that capability to act. And that, if you do that annually, you get this really awesome baseline of kind of how that, kind of the internal flavor, texture of the organization is shifting around climate and sustainability.
Great, and we'll be able to share more details on the CARA, I think, Jill, later. Danny has a really good question, which is, obviously lots of us come from large organizations. Which is the most impactful level of employee to train if you have limited time? And I suspect also limited budget. Is it middle management? Is it senior leadership? Is it the shop floor? What is it?
Great question. I think always kind of start at the top. Without that senior leadership support and buy-in, it's really hard to get the momentum that the company needs. And then I think after you've kind of really got that exec team on board, and that will probably be perhaps a half-a-day session, bringing some experts in and having a kind of a tight-knit, high-level conversation with these experts around where the company is and where the company needs to move. And I think often kind of creating space for vulnerable conversations, because a lot of people might not feel that kind of, some people might feel a bit kind of shy or vulnerable, kind of admitting that they don't know a lot of this stuff. So perhaps that in-person engagement for that top level is always a good way to start things off. And then I would say it's kind of that baseline training for all staff, and then think about those key specific functions that really are strategically important to you. Yeah, that's what I would say. But also, please, if any of my other Kite colleagues want to jump in with any of these responses, please join me.
I want to pick up on something that you said, Jill, about listening to and identifying where your senior leaders are at. It's so important to recognize also that they're human as well. The C-suite is human. They come in with their own concerns, their own perhaps preformed notions of what climate and sustainability are. And so it's important to meet them where they're at. And this is, of course, true of middle managers as well, because without the middle managers buy-in, nothing moves, right?
Yeah. I think often middle managers have the bad rap of the mushy middle, being extremely stretched, being responsible for kind of achieving KPIs, and really just not having the kind of the time or bandwidth to really think through and integrate this agenda into their work. So it can be quite hard to move that middle band, again, if they're not really given kind of the time and the space to integrate this very complex stuff into very, very large workloads.
Jill, maybe that picks up on the message I put on the chat, that I think focusing on the upskilling of employees and their understanding of the so what of sustainability for their roles is one thing, but also supporting those who are in charge of leading that sustainability transformation within their organization is a key, I think, success driver really of a successful transformation. So we are quite focused as well on supporting those individuals that have sustainability somehow in the job title, and how do we equip them with the resilience and the skills to drive such a change management program, which wasn't necessarily part of the initial job spec.
Yeah,
that they've received.
And I think just coming back to the Cara, our survey tool, I think when we speak about head, heart, and hands, and when we speak about the hands, we speak about two hands. And the one hand is really the enabling environment of the organization. And the other hand is the employees' kind of skills and competencies to drive change. So I think it's really interesting to always keep those two things in mind, because of course these middle managers are in an organizational context that will really kind of be the maker of their success, or not.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jill and Grace, for this great sharing of your 5 lessons. Maybe I'll take the opportunity to do a quick concluding comment with a few minutes to spare, so that we release you on time. But the first main point that Grace shared with us is really that the desire of employees to act on climate at work is mainstream, not just confined to the Gen Z. It's quite widely distributed across all different types of employees, which is exciting. However, the ability to act is definitely not yet mainstream. Employees feel they don't have the mandate, the tools, even though if they have the motivation. So the key question is, how do we tap into the potential of people and their desire to act when we know that sustainability and net zero really involves a transformation of the whole value chain? So people are at the center, and engaging employees and their leaders, for that matter, really presents somehow, I think it's maybe the silver lining of this crisis, a unique opportunity for impact, plus a unique opportunity to contribute to people's motivation and sense of well-being, which we know in themselves are key driver of financial impact. Grace also pointed to the risk of not doing so, with an increasing clear signal that people will leave if they can't act on climate and other sustainability issues in the context of their work. Second key lesson is how to do this well. And Jill was really pointing to create a shared understanding of both the risk of opportunities and aligning the organization around those, recognizing that digital training plays a part, but that's by no means sufficient, as we need to complement that with different media and formats to really drive action, including social learning. Third lesson: speak to your employees directly. Tell them tangible stories that are relatable to their job. Jill talked about the magic of bespoking to complement online learning with social training. Fourth lesson: bring learnings inside teams. Historically, it's been very much taking people out of the organization and upskilling them, which is still undeniably very valid. But here is really bringing the learning within teams, build the confidence, but also the opportunity collectively for groups to think about the implication for their jobs, for their teams, for the target, for the company, for the industry. Fifth lesson: make it specific to roles. Not all roles are impacted equally. Some are under more pressure than others, for sure, but I think the common thread there is that there are lots of expertise within those functions, within those roles. While those challenges are differentiated, there is a collective potential, I think, to unleash people's ingenuity and their ability to embed sustainability in their roles if we ignite in them a sense of possibility and confidence to do so. And just to conclude, I would say that when it comes to sustainability, we hear again and again that it's really, there's an imperative and an opportunity to engage people, heads, heart, and hands that is quite a profound and existential issues for many, and to really recognize that the kind of learning and engagement that it calls for is different. This is not about compliance learning, it's really about mobilizing and channeling people's desire to act, but also managing carefully the impact it has on people, the human context, if you will, not only on people, but on the communities within which they work. And I would end by saying that we really see people, as you can imagine, at the heart of sustainability transformation. This is an aspect that we think is often overlooked. This is combined with technology, with regulation, with all these very important levers of action. And as we were just talking about, the engagement and ability to, or readiness to act, for, in our view, really needs to be measured. That makes the whole engagement strategic, sustainable. It can be also benchmark, and we see more and more that investors are increasingly looking for proof point of action. And because they recognize that beyond the reporting and the commitment to 2030, 40, and 50, having proof signs that people are equipped with the mandate and the tools to take action is a very important indicator, if not predictor, of sustainability performance. So with that, I will close and thank you all very, very much for not only coming, joining us, contributing to your with those great questions. Feel free to come back to us with any question you may have. We will share the recording, and we're very happy for you to share that as widely as you see fit. So thank you very much again, Grace and Jill, for your great contribution, and thank you everyone for participating.
Thanks, Sophie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.